Hello and welcome to episode 15 of How to Code Games in BBC Basic. In this video, we're going to be looking at how to construct your own debugger. So, what I've done here basically is extend the program. So you will have noticed that in previous videos, this was the last line of the program here at the line 3270. But what I've done is introduce an extra procedure, which I've called proc debugger. And what this is essentially designed to do is print out three particular variables on the screen during the game. So I have selected the bottom right-hand corner of the game in order to display them, because as you'll recall from Cosmic Invaders, that area of the screen is blank at the bottom. So you've got the player's number of lives remaining in the bottom left of the screen, but then next to that there's a bit of blank space, and so that's a convenient place to print out the variables without disturbing the look of the rest of the game, because what you don't want to do is have your proc debugger interfere too much with the operation of the rest of the program. And that's very easy to do, by the way. I'll be demonstrating that as well a little bit later on. So yes, all I've done here is write three simple print tab commands, which just display the values of x, y, and m percentage. So these are the resident integer variables that are being used for well, x and y are being used for the positioning of the grid, which we saw in previous videos. And again, the m percentage variable here being used to indicate which frame of the two-frame sprite should be displayed for the invaders themselves. So you can see from the print tab commands that they all appear in terms of x and y coordinates. The y coordinate is always 24. That shows it that it's at the bottom of the screen, and then here 16, 22, and 28 just means that I get them next door to each other on the same line. I've got enough space to be able to print these three because the variable names themselves are quite short and the values themselves are only ever going to be at most a two-digit integer, so they fit nicely at the bottom of the screen. If I wanted to print out maybe a longer variable, for example something like mystery percentage, I might have to sacrifice a couple of others just so that I can fit it in at the bottom. But the luxury of the proc debugger is it's your own procedure, and you can basically put whatever you want into it, within reason, of course, because if you make it too much, it'll come off the screen and cause the program to do all kinds of crazy stuff. Now, one little extra that I've chosen to do here is I've used these control characters to change the colors of each one of these variables just to make it easier to spot them. So my X percentage will be in red, Y percentage in yellow, and and M percentage, in green. So that's just a little extra there. You don't have to use that, although I'll show you that if you don't put any control character in there, you might get some slightly unexpected results. So that's proc debugger, but the other thing that we need to do is obviously identify a particular place within the program itself to call it, because so far all we've done is just define a procedure, but if it doesn't get called anywhere, then it's not going to do anything. Now, obviously, we want to see these values changing as the program progresses, so the positioning of where we call proc debugger is really important. So I've chosen to call it, if I can just scroll up to, I might have to do a control find in a minute. No, can't quite find it. So let's go to update invaders. Here we go. So I've inserted an extra line here, line 2485, inside proc update invaders. So we haven't really looked at proc update invaders in detail just yet, but this is the procedure that essentially is called every time the grid of aliens has moved one position left or right. So it's actually controlling the positioning of the grid. So each time the aliens move, the first thing I want it to do now, before it gets into the meat of the procedure, is call proc debugger. And the reason that I've chosen this particular location is because this procedure gets called over and over again throughout the cycle of the program. So it's a really good place to put it for me to be able to see those variable values changing. So we'll bring up trusty bbem. As you can see on the screen here, I've just listed out the code for the proc debugger, which you can see here, and then where it appears within proc update invaders here as well, just to demonstrate that that's now part of the program that I'm running on bbem. So if I run the program now and go into it, what you should be able to now see, just move my invader under here, my base under here, you can now see X, Y, and M. So M, if we start with that one, you can see it really just flips from 0 to 1, 0 to 1, 0 to 1, and all it's doing is basically proving the point that when the invader sprite changes, M moves from 0 to 1 and back again. So that verifies what M percentage is up to, and it's quite handy to be able to see that in action. Now we've got the X percentage, which you can see is controlling the X position of the alien grid, and it decreases, decreases, decreases as they're moving left, and then it increases as they start moving right. Y percentage, if you've been noticing, has been steadily increasing. So it started off, I think, at either 2 or 3. It's now got to 5. Now it's moved to 6 as the invaders start to move down the screen. So you can already see that if I didn't know what these variables were doing, if I hadn't sort of worked it out from the code, just by inserting them here into my proc debugger, it really helps make sense of those slightly cryptically named variables because their value is changing in line with what's actually taking place on the screen. So yeah, a really good use for the proc debugger there, and a helpful way of being able to understand exactly what those variables are doing. Now we could change them. So if we decided that actually, you know what, I now understand what these variables are doing, maybe we could change it to something else. So one of the other slightly mysterious sets of resident integer variables are O and P. So I'm going to switch it to O and P here, but of course I need to do the same inside my BVEM as well. So if we do list 3290 and 300. Right, so I'm just going to reset these here. So instead of having X, I'm now going to have O percentage, and we'll just copy across, O percentage, and copy across. So that's now changed that line, and we're going to change line 3300. So become, again in yellow, but now it's going to be P percentage. And just copy across, oops, P, and across to the end. Right, so now if we run, first of all, the first thing we're going to notice is we've got O and P at the bottom. O is 0, P is 6. Now, I'm going to have to play through a bit of the game just to try and get those values to change. But again, if you didn't know what they did and you had the debugger in operation and just basically played enough of the game, you might start to realize what it does, because I've cleared a whole column of aliens on the far left now, and O has gone to 1, which is of course what we understood in principle in a previous video. Now, what about P? So let's see, if I go to the other side, I mean, obviously this is aided in part by the fact that I know what these variables are designed to do, but let's assume that I didn't, and I was just basically trying to get an understanding. I could be playing through the game, and, oh, didn't quite get that one there, hang on, let's try that again. Hopefully that's going to get it. No, I've missed again. Okay, hopefully that will be enough. And there we go. P has now changed to 5. So by clearing a column on the far right-hand side, we now understand what that variable of P is up to. And so that's, again, once again, proved the point, the power of the debugger, that in fact it is really useful to have these variables on screen to understand exactly what they do. Now you may have been wondering why it is that I've had to put those print commands in the way that I have. Now I cheated a little bit earlier when I said, oh well, it was quite nice to have it in red, and that's why I've done that. But actually there is another reason why you need to put that control character in, and those of you who have been watching the videos in the series will probably understand why that's the case. Now if I just change these lines to remove the control character, and we'll just say, okay, instead of having red and yellow, we're just going to go straight to the values as is. Now we'll see what happens. And of course, I've now got a bit of a problem here, because my O and P have turned into, or the values of them have turned into sixels, because of course we've actually got a control character governing the entire bottom row. That's why the remaining lives are displayed in cyan, and they're using sixels obviously to display the life indicator. So without changing the control character to one of the text-based control characters, I end up with a bit of a mess there, and I'm not going to be able to make sense of what those variables actually mean. So that's why it's important, obviously, to have the control characters in place. Now, another thing that may not have been apparent from the start. So if I introduce the control character back in again, so I think it was our string, and then can continue with the rest of the line, and we'll restore our previous value here as well. So we'll put this one to yellow and continue. Cool. And just to prove the point, make sure that we've corrected that. So now we're back to how we were before. Excellent. Now, the other reason why you need to write that print tab statement in exactly this format is that if I don't include, for example, that concatenator on the end there, or rather not concatenator so much as the character that tells us to just print on the same line, let's see what happens now. So I've got my O and P. Uh-oh. You can see that something rather terrible is happening because I haven't put that semicolon at the end. The game doesn't understand, or rather, it tries to meet what I've asked it to do, which is to print, but then typically a print command each time you call it will try to print on the next line. So unless you have that semicolon at the end saying I want you to continue printing on the same line, this is the rather murky and unfortunate consequence of not including it. So it is important, just underscores the reason why those terminating semicolons really do matter. Creates quite a mysterious looking game. In fact, my base is still technically there, but as you can see, it really causes quite a mess. So the reason I've used this is just to indicate the importance of programming your debugger procedure correctly. Because if you don't program it correctly, you can end up ruining the overall performance of the program, and then that rather undoes the idea of having a debugger in the first place. So always ensure that your debugger is not only positioned in a way that it will display on the screen in a way that doesn't interfere with the workings of the program, but also make sure that any print commands that you use are set out in such a way that they will, whenever they refresh, print over the top of what was previously written rather than trying to print on subsequent lines. But overall, that's really what the debugger is all about, and it's really just a way of being able to have a peep inside the program and understand what it is that's taking place. It's a much better alternative than, for example, exiting the program and then trying to see what the values of those mysterious resident integer variables might have been. Because although you can do that, for example, I can see that at the point that I exited the program, the values of x and y here were 3 and 7. It's very difficult to make sense of them without also seeing how the values change with the game itself in operation. So there are a number of considerations to take into account when you do decide to add a debugger to your program, whether it's because you're trying to understand a program that someone else has written, or indeed because you want to debug your own program. But the main rules are: make sure that you print the variables in a place on the screen which isn't going to interfere with the rest of the program. Make sure you set up the print commands so that they print over the top of each other each time the debugger is called. And finally, make sure that you call the debugger at a suitable place within the program, because if you don't call it at a particular place where the variables themselves or the values of them are going to change, then it effectively won't give you what it is that you're looking for. But this was a bit of an aside. I realize that it's taken us away from the original code of Cosmic Invaders itself, but I wanted to have this little extra video in the series because it probably helps explain, for those of you who've been watching, how I've been able to make sense of the program. Using little tricks like this are really helpful when you're trying to make sense of what the program does. And they're well worth doing when you're writing your own games as well, because these little debuggers are really helpful for making sense of what the program is doing. The only thing that remains is make sure you get rid of them once you're happy with the game, because obviously you don't want someone seeing the values of variables on the screen as part of the game. That would rather interfere with the overall effect. So there we go, that was peeking behind the curtain. Hope you've enjoyed that one, and I hope you'll join me for the next video in the series. Until then, goodbye.